almost got knocked down by two different old people while trying to get my husband's medications. Yeah, you heard that right. Two separate elderly individuals nearly sent me sprawling across a military hospital floor, all because they couldn't wait their turn. What happened that day showed me just how cruel people can be when they think nobody's watching. My name is Lauren, I'm 34 years old, and I've been married to my husband Trevor for 8 years now. That Tuesday morning started like any nightmare you never want to live through, watching the person you love most get wheeled into surgery, knowing there's absolutely nothing you can do but wait and pray everything goes according to plan. Trevor and I met during college at a small coffee shop near campus. He was studying engineering, I was working toward my teaching degree, and we both had this habit of showing up at the same corner table every Tuesday and Thursday around 2 in the afternoon. For weeks, we'd steal glances at each other over our textbooks, both too shy to actually say anything. Finally, he worked up the courage to ask if I wanted to share the table since we were both regulars. That simple question changed everything. Our relationship blossomed slowly, like the most beautiful flower you've ever seen opening its petals one by one. We'd study together, grab dinner at cheap restaurants near campus, and spend hours talking about our dreams. Trevor wanted to design bridges that would connect communities, while I dreamed of inspiring young minds in elementary classrooms. We supported each other through late-night study sessions, celebrated each small victory, and built a foundation of trust and love that seemed unbreakable. After graduation, we moved to Colorado Springs where Trevor joined the Army Corps of Engineers, and I started teaching at a local elementary school. The early years of our marriage were filled with simple joys and shared adventures. We'd spend weekends hiking in the Rocky Mountains, trying new recipes in our tiny kitchen, and planning for the future we wanted to build together. Trevor would come home from work with stories about the infrastructure projects he was helping design, while I'd share funny anecdotes about my students' latest discoveries and creative interpretations of math problems. We talked about having children someday, buying a house with a big backyard, and growing old together while still holding hands. Life felt perfect, predictable in the best possible way. Trevor was the kind of husband who would surprise me with my favorite coffee on rough Monday mornings, who remembered every important date, and who never made me feel like my dreams were less important than his career. We had our routines, our inside jokes, and that comfortable intimacy that comes when you truly know another person's heart. I thought we were invincible, that nothing could touch what we'd built together. But then Trevor started having these strange stomach pains that wouldn't go away. At first, we both dismissed them as stress from a particularly challenging project at work. He doubled over occasionally after meals, but he'd just take some antacids and push through. Being the stubborn man he was, Trevor insisted it was nothing serious, probably just too much spicy food or irregular eating habits during long workdays. The pain gradually got worse over several months. I'd catch him wincing when he thought I wasn't looking, or notice how he'd unconsciously press his hand against his abdomen during conversations. When I suggested he see a doctor, he'd brush off my concerns with that charming smile that usually made me forget whatever I was worried about. But this time, something felt different. Call it intuition or just knowing someone so well you can sense when something's wrong, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more serious than either of us wanted to admit. One evening in late September, Trevor collapsed in our kitchen while making dinner. Just completely doubled over in agony, gasping for breath between waves of pain that seemed to ripple through his entire body. I'd never seen him like that before, my strong, reliable husband reduced to tears on our kitchen floor. That's when I knew we couldn't ignore this anymore. I called 911, and within 20 minutes, we were speeding toward the military hospital with sirens wailing and Trevor gripping my hand like his life depended on it. The emergency room doctors ran test after test, each one revealing more concerning details about what was happening inside Trevor's abdomen. They found inflammation, possible blockages, and tissue that didn't look quite right on the scans. The medical terminology flew over my head, but the grave expressions on the doctors' faces told me everything I needed to know. They scheduled surgery for the following Tuesday, giving us a week to process what felt like our entire world shifting beneath our feet. That week passed in a blur of preoperative appointments, insurance paperwork, and quiet conversations about worst-case scenarios we didn't want to acknowledge out loud. Trevor tried to maintain his usual optimistic demeanor, joking with the nurses and reassuring me that everything would be fine. But I could see the fear in his eyes during those unguarded moments when he thought I was sleeping. We'd lie in bed at night, holding each other tighter than usual, both pretending we weren't terrified of what the surgery might reveal. The morning of the surgery, I drove Trevor to the military hospital at dawn. The parking lot was already filling up with other families beginning their own medical journeys, and I remember thinking how strange it was that so much fear and hope could exist in one place at the same time. We checked in at the front desk, and within an hour, Trevor was being prepped for what the doctors called an exploratory abdominal surgery with possible resection. Those clinical terms couldn't capture the reality of watching my husband disappear behind operating room doors, not knowing if he'd be the same person when he came back out. The waiting room became my temporary home for the next 6 hours. I tried to read magazines, attempted to focus on grading papers I'd brought from school, and made small talk with other worried family members. But mostly, I just stared at the clock and prayed to whatever higher power might be listening that Trevor would be okay. Every time someone in scrubs walked through the waiting area, my heart would skip a beat, hoping it was news about my husband but also dreading what that news might contain. Finally, Dr. Patterson appeared in the doorway, still wearing his surgical cap and looking cautiously optimistic. The surgery had gone well, he explained, though they'd had to remove more tissue than initially expected. Trevor would need several days in the hospital for recovery, followed by weeks of careful monitoring at home. Most importantly, the tissue they'd removed would be sent for testing, and we'd have those results within a few days. Dr. Patterson's words were reassuring, but I could hear the unspoken caution in his voice. We weren't out of the woods yet. Trevor spent the next 3 days in the hospital, gradually regaining his strength and appetite while I camped out in the uncomfortable bedside chair. The nurses were incredible, checking on him regularly and adjusting his pain medication as needed. But by Thursday morning, it became clear that Trevor would need several prescription medications for his recovery at home, pain management, anti-inflammatory drugs, and something to prevent infection. The discharge nurse handed me a list of medications and directions to the hospital pharmacy. That's when my real adventure began. I'd been using a walking cane for the past 6 months due to some ongoing mobility issues with my left leg, an old sports injury from high school that had been acting up more frequently. Walking long distances was challenging, and I had to be careful about my balance, especially in crowded or unfamiliar places. The military hospital was massive, with multiple wings and what felt like miles of corridors connecting different departments. Following the signs toward the pharmacy, I made my way through the main hospital building, past various clinics and administrative offices. The pharmacy was located in a separate wing, requiring me to navigate through several different areas before reaching the right section. As I got closer, I noticed there was a service counter position near the pharmacy entrance, apparently designed to help direct patients to the appropriate areas and answer basic questions. This counter sat in the middle of a wide hallway, with enough space for people to walk around either side while approaching the pharmacy entrance. I was making my way toward this counter, moving carefully with my cane and watching the floor to avoid any obstacles, when I heard rapid footsteps approaching from behind. Before I could react or step aside, an elderly man in his 70s rushed past me, coming so close that he actually brushed against my shoulder and nearly knocked me off balance. I had to grab onto a nearby wall to steady myself, my heart racing from the close call. This wasn't just someone walking quickly, this man had deliberately rushed past me to reach the service counter first, despite seeing that I was clearly heading in the same direction and obviously had mobility challenges. What made it worse was his complete lack of acknowledgement. No, excuse me, no, sorry, not even a glance back to see if I was okay after nearly knocking me down. The staff member at the counter, a young woman in her 20s with a friendly demeanor, had witnessed the entire incident. Her expression shifted from professional helpfulness to genuine surprise and concern. She looked from the elderly man to me, clearly taken aback by what she'd just observed. When the man reached the counter and started speaking to her in a demanding tone about where he needed to go, she answered his questions efficiently but kept glancing in my direction with an apologetic look. "Sir, the lab is located on the 2nd floor. Take the elevator at the end of this hall and turn left," she told him. He grunted his acknowledgement and hurried off without a word of thanks, leaving me standing there still processing what had just happened. The staff member immediately turned her attention to me, her expression softening with genuine concern. "I'm so sorry about that," she said, shaking her head. "Are you all right?" "That was completely unnecessary." "I'm fine, thank you," I replied, though I was still feeling shaken. "I just need to get to the pharmacy for my husband's medications. He just had surgery." "Of course, let me help you with that," she said warmly. "The pharmacy is just around this corner to your right. They should have your prescriptions ready if the doctor sent them over electronically, but you'll need to wait in line at window number 3 for medication pickup." I thanked her for the directions and her kindness, especially after witnessing such rudeness from the previous visitor. She assured me that most people were much more considerate, and that she hoped the rest of my visit would go more smoothly. Her empathy meant more than she probably realized, given how rattled I felt from the encounter. Following her directions, I made my way toward the pharmacy area, which was busier than I'd expected for a Thursday afternoon. There were several different windows serving different purposes: new prescriptions, refills, insurance questions, and medication counseling. I located window number 3, where a small line had formed with about 4 people ahead of me. The setup was straightforward enough, with clear floor markings indicating where to stand and wait your turn. I positioned myself at the back of the line, leaning slightly on my cane and checking my phone to pass the time. The line moved slowly but steadily as each person ahead of me was helped. I was focused on the list of medications in my hand, making sure I had all the necessary information ready, when I heard commotion coming from the main hospital corridor behind me. Looking over my shoulder, I could see people emerging from various elevators and doorways, the typical afternoon flow of patients and visitors moving through the hospital. The pharmacy area had large windows overlooking this main thoroughfare, so it was easy to observe the general activity. I turned back toward the line, noting that only 2 people remained ahead of me now. That's when the second incident occurred. I was taking a small step forward as the line advanced when I felt someone pushing past me from behind, not brushing past, but actually pushing with enough force to move me sideways. This time, I genuinely almost lost my balance, having to plant my cane firmly and grab onto a nearby railing to prevent myself from falling. The person who pushed past me was another elderly man, probably in his late 60s, who had apparently come from the main hospital area and decided he needed to get in front of me in line. Unlike the first incident where the man had rushed past, this one involved actual physical contact. He had placed his hand on my back and pushed me aside to create space for himself. I was stunned. Not just surprised, but genuinely shocked that someone would physically move another person, especially someone obviously using a mobility aid, just to get ahead in line. My initial reaction was disbelief. Surely this was some kind of misunderstanding or accident. Maybe he hadn't seen me properly, or maybe he was having some kind of medical emergency that required immediate attention. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and polite. "I was actually standing in line here. Did you not see me?" He turned to look at me with an expression that I can only describe as annoyed condescension. Not embarrassment, not apology, not even acknowledgement that he'd done something wrong. Just this look that suggested I was being unreasonable for questioning his behavior. He stared at me for several long seconds, as if I was the one being rude by pointing out that he'd pushed his way in front of me. "I'm in a hurry," he finally said, as if that explained and justified everything. Then he turned back toward the pharmacy window, dismissing me entirely from his attention. I stood there for a moment, processing his response and trying to decide how to handle the situation. Part of me wanted to escalate it, to insist that he wait his turn like everyone else, or to call over a staff member to intervene. But another part of me just felt tired from worrying about Trevor, tired from spending days in the hospital, and tired from dealing with people who seemed to have forgotten basic courtesy and respect. The woman in line ahead of us had witnessed the entire exchange, and she turned around to give me a sympathetic look. "Some people have no manners," she whispered, shaking her head in disgust. "You should report him to the staff." I appreciated her support, but I decided to let it go. Trevor was waiting for his pain medication, and I didn't want to create a scene that might delay getting his prescriptions filled. I also realized that arguing with someone who clearly didn't see anything wrong with his behavior was unlikely to result in any positive outcome. Instead, I took a deep breath and focused on the reason I was there in the first place. When it was the rude man's turn at the pharmacy window, he spent several minutes arguing with the pharmacist about his insurance coverage and demanding to speak to a supervisor about some billing issue. The irony wasn't lost on me. Someone who claimed to be in such a hurry that he had to push past other people was now holding up the entire line with his complaints. Meanwhile, I stood patiently behind him, leaning on my cane and watching this display of selfish behavior. Eventually, his issues were resolved, and he left the pharmacy area without so much as a glance in my direction. When my turn came, the pharmacist was apologetic about the delay and extra helpful in making sure I had all of Trevor's medications along with clear instructions for each one. She even offered to call ahead to our regular pharmacy for future refills, saving us trips back to the hospital. Walking back through the hospital toward the parking lot, I found myself reflecting on what had happened. These weren't isolated incidents of minor rudeness, they were examples of people who had completely lost sight of basic human decency. Both men had seen that I was using a mobility aid, both had witnessed that I was clearly struggling to navigate the hospital environment, and both had chosen their own convenience over my safety and dignity. What bothered me most wasn't just the physical aspect of being pushed and nearly knocked down, though that was certainly concerning. It was the complete lack of empathy or awareness these individuals showed for anyone but themselves. They didn't see me as a person dealing with my own challenges and fears, worried about my husband recovering from surgery. I was just an obstacle in their path, something to be pushed aside or rushed past without consideration. The drive home gave me time to process these experiences more fully. I thought about how stress and worry can sometimes make people act in ways they normally wouldn't, but that didn't excuse treating others with such disrespect. I also realized that this wasn't just about age. Rudeness and inconsideration can be found in people of any generation. These particular individuals happened to be elderly, but I'd witnessed similar behavior from people of all ages throughout my life. When I got home, Trevor was resting in our bedroom, eager to hear about my trip to the pharmacy and grateful to have his medications. As I told him about the encounters with the two rude men, I could see the anger building in his eyes. Despite being weakened from surgery, his protective instincts kicked in, and he wanted to know if I'd been hurt or if I'd reported the incidents to hospital security. "I'm okay," I assured him, though I was still feeling unsettled by the experiences. "It's just frustrating how some people act when they think nobody's paying attention to their behavior. That's exactly when you can tell what someone's really like," Trevor replied, his voice tight with controlled anger. "When they think there are no consequences for treating people badly." His words stuck with me over the following days as I helped him recover at home. I kept thinking about those moments in the hospital and what they revealed about the current state of courtesy and respect in our society. These weren't life or death emergencies where people might be excused for desperate behavior. These were routine medical appointments where basic patience and consideration should have been the norm. I started noticing similar patterns in other places: grocery stores where people cut in line or push past others, parking lots where drivers ignored handicapped spaces or blocked traffic for their own convenience, restaurants where customers treated staff with contempt and impatience. It seemed like common courtesy had become uncommon, and basic respect for others had been replaced by an attitude of me first, regardless of the circumstances. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that these hospital incidents were symptoms of a larger problem in our culture. We've become so focused on our own needs, our own schedules, our own priorities, that we've forgotten how to consider the impact of our actions on other people. We've lost the art of patience, the practice of kindness, and the simple recognition that everyone around us is fighting their own battles and deserving of respect. What made these particular incidents even more troubling was that they occurred in a hospital setting, a place where people are dealing with illness, injury, fear, and vulnerability. If there's anywhere that calls for extra compassion and consideration, it should be in medical facilities where everyone present is coping with health concerns for themselves or their loved ones. Instead, I encountered people who seemed to view the hospital as just another place where they needed to compete for position and priority. I began to wonder what had happened to the values of courtesy and respect that previous generations had tried to instill in their children. Had we become so busy, so stressed, so focused on efficiency that we'd forgotten the human element of our interactions? Were we so accustomed to digital communication and automated services that we'd lost the skills for face-to-face courtesy and consideration? The incident also made me think about vulnerability and how people respond to it. When someone is using a mobility aid, dealing with a medical crisis, or clearly struggling with physical challenges, that should invoke compassion and helpfulness from others. Instead, I'd encountered people who seemed to view my vulnerability as weakness to be exploited for their own advantage. They saw someone who couldn't move as quickly or assertively, and they used that as an opportunity to push ahead rather than offer assistance. As Trevor continued to recover over the following weeks, I shared my thoughts with friends and family members, curious to hear about their own experiences with rudeness and inconsideration in public spaces. Almost everyone had similar stories: being cut off in traffic by impatient drivers, dealing with aggressive behavior in stores, or witnessing people being cruel to service workers who were just trying to do their jobs. One friend told me about being pushed aside by someone rushing to catch an elevator, despite the fact that she was clearly pregnant and moving slowly. Another described watching elderly customers being ignored or dismissed by younger shoppers who acted like senior citizens were wasting their time. These stories confirmed my growing sense that respect for others, especially those who might need extra consideration or patience, had seriously eroded in our society. But I also heard stories that gave me hope. People described strangers who had gone out of their way to help when they saw someone struggling, individuals who had shown patience and kindness in stressful situations, and communities that had rallied around members dealing with health crises or other challenges. These examples reminded me that rudeness and selfishness aren't universal. There are still plenty of people who choose compassion over convenience, kindness over competition. The contrast between these different approaches to human interaction became even more apparent as I continued accompanying Trevor to follow-up appointments at the hospital. During subsequent visits, I encountered medical staff who went above and beyond to ensure patient comfort, fellow patients who offered seats or assistance when they saw someone struggling, and family members who showed patience and understanding even when dealing with their own stress and worry. These positive interactions highlighted just how unusual and unnecessary the rudeness I'd experienced during that first pharmacy visit had been. When people choose to act with consideration and respect, it creates an atmosphere that makes difficult situations more bearable for everyone involved. When they choose selfishness and aggression, it adds unnecessary stress to already challenging circumstances. I began to see my role in this dynamic more clearly. While I couldn't control how others chose to behave, I could control my own responses and actions. I could model the kind of patience and courtesy I wanted to see from others. I could speak up when I witnessed rudeness, not necessarily to change the behavior of the rude person, but to support the person being mistreated and to demonstrate that such behavior isn't acceptable or normal. This realization led me to be more intentional about my interactions with others, especially in stressful environments like hospitals, airports, or busy stores. I made an effort to let people with obvious mobility challenges go ahead of me in lines, to offer assistance when I saw someone struggling, and to treat service workers with extra patience and appreciation for their efforts under difficult circumstances. I also became more willing to speak up when I witnessed others being treated rudely or inconsiderately. Not in an aggressive or confrontational way, but in a supportive manner that let both the victim and the perpetrator know that such behavior wasn't going unnoticed. Sometimes a simple, "Are you okay?" to someone who's been pushed or dismissed can make all the difference in how they feel about the encounter. Looking back on those incidents at the hospital pharmacy, I realized they served as a wake-up call about the importance of maintaining courtesy and respect in our daily interactions with others. They reminded me that everyone we encounter is dealing with their own challenges, fears, and responsibilities, and that a little patience and consideration can make someone's difficult day just a bit easier to bear. The experience also reinforced my appreciation for the people in my life who consistently choose kindness over convenience, who offer help rather than seeking advantage, and who treat others with dignity regardless of the circumstances. These individuals, friends, family members, healthcare workers, teachers, and countless strangers I've encountered, represent the best of human nature and serve as examples of how we can all choose to interact with the world around us. Trevor's recovery went smoothly, thanks in part to the excellent care he received from medical professionals who embodied the values of compassion and respect that seemed to be lacking in some of the other people we encountered. His surgery was successful, the tissue tests came back with good news, and within a few weeks he was back to his normal routines and activities. But the lessons from that day at the hospital pharmacy have stayed with me long after Trevor's physical healing was complete. They've made me more aware of how my actions affect others, more appreciative of kindness when I encounter it, and more committed to being part of the solution rather than part of the problem when it comes to how we treat each other in public spaces. The truth is, we all have places to go, appointments to keep, and responsibilities to handle. Life moves fast, schedules are demanding, and stress is a constant companion for most of us. But none of those realities justify treating other people with disrespect or disregard. If anything, our shared struggles should make us more compassionate toward each other, more willing to offer patience when someone needs it, and more conscious of how our behavior impacts those around us. So here's what I want you to take away from my story: slow down, pay attention to the people around you, and choose kindness whenever possible. That person moving slowly in front of you might be dealing with mobility issues, chronic pain, or recovery from surgery. The individual who seems confused or uncertain might be navigating a medical crisis for themselves or a loved one. The service worker who appears overwhelmed might be doing their best under impossible circumstances. We can't always know what battles other people are fighting, but we can choose to respond with grace rather than impatience, with helpfulness rather than competition, and with respect rather than dismissal. These small choices, multiplied across countless daily interactions, have the power to create the kind of society we all want to live in, one where people look out for each other instead of looking past each other. Everyone has somewhere to be and something important to do. But that doesn't mean we have to knock each other down to get there. There's enough room in this world for all of us to move forward together, with patience, respect, and consideration for the people sharing the journey with us. That's not just wishful thinking, it's a choice we can all make, one interaction at a time.